This One's Wife, their biggest fan. Hilary Rose is a scathing skeptic and critic of This One's Wife. What does she think about Omid Scobie's Bellendgame? Her title reads, Omid Scobie's Bellendgame Review. Harry and This One's Wife's biggest fan is back. For his next book, the author of Finding Freedom is by turns breathless, belligerent and boring, as he muses on the future of the royal family. Say what you will about Omid Scobie, the man writes a killer intro. Finding Freedom, his last book about the royals, started with a bang, luggage arriving at a house in Canada, and moved breathlessly on to talk of square footage and wardrobe space. Now, having read a fairly substantial amount of Finding Freedom and wanted to claw my eyes out during the process, what was apparent were two things. One, it was clearly This One's Wife's diaries, otherwise there was no way that Scobie could have known the things that he wrote about. Two, it was chock full of padding, because there wasn't actually that much to write about, demonstrating the paucity of interest that exists with This One's Wife. Yes, there's plenty of interest in watching her fuck up, but if you strip all of that away, is she an interesting person? No, she's not. She's utterly beige, has nothing interesting or meaningful ever to say, is dull, charisma-free. Rose continues by explaining the new book, Bellendgame, starts with him buying a black sweater, followed by how he got to a TV studio in Hammersmith. Seems like more padding to me. By page 6 of a book about the royal family's supposed fight for survival, we feel the full force of his argument. Everyone already knows that King Charles might have preferred a life as Queen Camilla's tampon. Only 363 pages of po-faced prose still to come. Scobie spends quite a bit of the prologue bigging himself up as a serious and well-connected royal reporter. He writes breathlessly that a long-serving member of the Queen's most trusted staff told him Charles may be the next king, but William is the future. And hopefully he was sitting down for that scoop. If you can read the following without laughing, you're better than me. The rot has set in, and it's eating away at the monarchy's undergirding. Undergirding? Undergirding. In case you're wondering what undergird means, it is to secure or fasten from the underside, especially by a rope or chain passed underneath. Well, the last time that I looked, I don't think that the royal family was fastened or secured by a chain or rope underneath. So this supposedly serious journalist doesn't really have an appropriate command of the English language. Not really a surprise, is it? Rose continues, as you'd expect, the poor Harry and This One's Wife stuff is there from the get-go. Attempt to engender sympathy, pity play by proxy, in all its vaguely defamatory glory. The institutional cruelty they experienced at the hands of the palace, and as I've explained elsewhere, this institutional cruelty or institutional racism is how This One's Wife's narcissism is interpreted, being told no as a consequence of what she wants to do, offending the conventions and practices of the institution. It explains that the misogyny and racism will be ignored or hushed up, but there was no mention of the report into This One's Wife's alleged bullying commissioned by the palace, and also hushed up. It never cuts both ways. There are no shades of grey, only good guys and bad guys. And so to Queen Elizabeth's last days at Balmoral. The castle is, we learn, in any season a beautiful place, boasting a stunning view of some sublime peaks. Nobody, he writes, knew in advance that it would be the final weekend of her life, showing an admirable grasp of how death works. He writes how, after her death, Charles chatted to members of the public outside Buckingham Palace who had come to pay their condolences. It's not a stretch to suggest that this moment was orchestrated and planned by Charles and his team years ago, he writes. And it's true, it isn't a stretch, but it's also boring. The book is full of this sort of thing. A chapter called Shaky Ground could be more aptly named Well-Travelled Ground, revisiting the row over the lady-in-waiting who asked a racist question, bringing up the past. We learn what Scobie thinks of MI5, Storied, Tony Blair's record on Afghanistan and Iraq, risky neoconservative interventions, and a dazzling amount about David Ogilvy, the 13th Earl of Airlie, appointed Lord Chamberlain in 1983. We already know all we ever needed to know about Charles's Black Spider memos, and whilst it is possible that he declined an invitation to fly to California for Lilibet's christening because he is a heartless monster, it could also be because it was a few weeks before his coronation. There are chapters on Prince Andrew and Princess Diana. Enough said. This is basically Finding Freedom, the sequel. It's not so much an incisive look at why he thinks the monarchy is doomed, more a mishmash of ancient history, aging stories, and a bit of new stuff, some of it interesting. The monarchy might face questions about its future, but Scobie doesn't have many answers. Mostly, he offers random thoughts, wild generalizations, and score settling. It's a shame, because the royal family obviously isn't perfect. Its members are, I expect, as fallible, ruthless, and occasionally unkind as anyone else. Harry and this one's wife, for example. There are valid conversations to be had about the royal family's connections to and profit from slavery, and about racism in Britain today. But it doesn't help anyone to prove your point by stating that the mawkish Union Jack and St. George cross-flag waving often conjures up a yearning for the golden age of empire. Oh, please. Writing about a 2019 EU report which found Britain to be the least racist place in Europe, Scobie writes, "But being the least racist country doesn't mean there isn't any racism." Well, of course it doesn't. Notice how he bangs the drum about racism on behalf of his mistress. He gets variously het up about canals because they transported goods cultivated by enslaved people, and a Koh-i-Noor. Looted wealth is visible everywhere, he writes glibly, although Koh-i-Noor has been looted more times from more places than I've had hot dinners. Charles and Camilla ventured to Wrexham to celebrate the village achieving city status. Is thrillingly both boring and wrong. Wrexham was a town. Nobody will be surprised that Princess Michael of Kent doesn't come out of this well. Few would argue that Harry and this one's wife were a sad loss to the monarchy, but off they went, and here we are. Stating that William is disappointed by Harry's lifestyle decisions could mean anything from his wife to his chickens. So what's the point? H&M's eviction from Frogmore may well speak of bitterness and recrimination, but one man's bitterness and recrimination is another man's righteous revenge for being trashed on Oprah. Any insights are only found if you survive chapters which begin like this. Resting in the rugged but fertile valleys that stretch between Crete's majestic Mount Solaritus and the towers of sun-bleached limestone that make up Mount Spouthie, the Linacus Winery is a family-owned business best known for its first-rate wine and commitment to sustainability and environmental stewardship, i.e., once again, more of the padding. The existence and future of the monarchy is a debate like any other, worth having as long as we disagree agreeably. Scobie doesn't debate, he berates. And by the way, the sweater came from M&S and he got to the TV studio on the tube. That's £22. I've just saved you. So writes Hilary Rose, with her usual wit, about the dross that is Bellendgame, demonstrating that it is padding, spurious allegations, and very, very little substance, and simply demonstrating once again that he is the mouthpiece of the Sussexes. Something, of course, that this one's wife needs through the loyal lieutenant, her narcissism compelling her to cause him to achieve control over people by proxy, but all it does is increase the dislike for them because of the use of the improbably named, plastic-faced, Weasley lickspittle that is Omid Scobie. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.